AITA for storming off after I didn't pay for my fiancé's sister's restaurant bill. Then she still insisted that I apologize and pay. Last week, my fiancé's sister came to town for Christmas, which was a big deal for everyone. She usually doesn't visit because she's deep into her computer science studies, staying at her university for most of the year, so whenever she does come home, it's a special occasion. I've known my fiancé and his sister practically since childhood, our families are incredibly close, and I've always had a good relationship with her. She's a kind person, always supportive, and I've never had a problem with her before. So when my fiancé told me that we'd be having dinner with her, I was actually excited. I thought it would be nice to catch up, hear about how school was going for her, and just spend some time together. What I didn't expect, however, was that my fiancé had chosen a ridiculously expensive restaurant for the dinner. I don't go to places like that. It's just way out of my budget, and my fiancé knows this. We've always been practical when it comes to money, and even when we do eat out, we usually just split the bill 50-50. So naturally, when I saw the restaurant choice, I assumed either he or his sister planned on covering the bill. After all, why would they choose such a place if they weren't willing to pay for it? I wasn't going to question it. I trusted them. We arrived at the restaurant, checked in for our table, and took our seats. It was one of those places with dim lighting, soft background music, and the kind of menu that doesn't even list prices next to the dishes because if you have to ask, you probably can't afford it. I took one glance at the menu and knew I wasn't going to order much. I settled on a simple steak, which cost about $25, expensive, but manageable. Meanwhile, my fiancé's sister was going all out. She ordered some of the priciest dishes available, things I didn't even recognize, plus drinks and appetizers like money was no object. My fiancé didn't seem to mind, so again, I just assumed one of them was planning to cover it. Dinner itself was great. We talked, laughed, and caught up on everything that had been happening in her life. She told us about her studies, the projects she was working on, and how she barely had time to visit home because of her workload. I was genuinely happy to see her and enjoyed the conversation. It felt like a nice evening, until the bill arrived. The waiter placed the receipt on the table, and I casually glanced at it, just out of curiosity. My stomach dropped when I saw the total, $300. $300. That was way more than I had expected. Before I could even react, my fiancé subtly pushed the receipt toward me and gestured for me to pay with my card. I stared at him, completely thrown off. Was he serious? There was no way he actually expected me to cover this. I shook my head, signaling a firm no. That was when he narrowed his eyes at me, his entire expression shifting from casual to irritated in an instant. He looked frustrated, like I was being difficult for no reason. Then, before I could say anything, he spoke over me and told the waiter, he will be paying full. I was stunned. Completely blindsided. My fiancé's sister chimed in then, looking at me as if I was being unreasonable. My name, pay for it this one time, she said, as if $300 was nothing, as if it was just a small, insignificant favor. That was the moment I felt pure humiliation wash over me. I could feel my face heating up, not just from anger but from the sheer embarrassment of being put on the spot like that, in front of a waiter, in a high-end restaurant I hadn't even wanted to go to in the first place. I didn't even argue. I just stood up, reached into my wallet, took out $27, enough to cover my meal and a small tip, and set it on the table. Then, without another word, I turned and walked out of the restaurant. I didn't care about how it looked, didn't care if people were staring. I refused to let myself be manipulated into paying for something I never agreed to. I drove straight home, my hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary, my mind racing with frustration and disbelief. My fiancé knew my financial situation. He knew I couldn't afford something like that. So why had he ambushed me like that? Why had his sister acted like it was my responsibility to cover a meal she had splurged on? By the time I got home, my phone was blowing up with messages and missed calls. My fiancé was furious. 35 minutes later, he walked through the door and immediately started an argument. He accused me of embarrassing him and his sister, of making a scene, of being childish for walking out. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told him point blank that I was never going to pay that bill, and that he was the one who put me in an unfair position. But he refused to see it that way. To him, I had simply overreacted. And now, I can't stop replaying the whole thing in my head. Maybe storming out wasn't the most mature response, but I refuse to believe I was in the wrong for not paying. If anything, I feel betrayed. How could my fiancé, the person who is supposed to be my partner, do that to me? Am I the asshole? Update 1. I honestly thought that night at the restaurant would be the end of it. I assumed my fiancé, Daniel, would eventually realize how unfair the whole thing was and move on. I thought, at worst, we'd have a couple of tense days, some awkward silences, but eventually, we'd get back to normal. That's how things usually went when we argued, heated words, space, then a resolution. But this time, something felt different. Daniel barely spoke to me the next day. He wasn't outright ignoring me, but there was a coldness to him that I didn't like. Every conversation felt forced, as if he was tolerating me rather than actually wanting to talk. I kept waiting for him to acknowledge that he had put me in an impossible position, that he understood why I had reacted the way I did, but it never came. Instead, he acted like I was the one who had wronged him. And the worst part? He seemed to expect me to just get over it, to push everything aside without so much as an apology from him. A few days passed like this. The tension lingered, but I kept telling myself that maybe it was just a matter of time. He needed to process things, to cool off. So when he casually suggested we go out for dinner one evening, I took it as an olive branch. The place he picked was a small Italian restaurant we'd been to before, nothing fancy, just a comfortable spot where we knew the food was good and the prices were reasonable. It felt like a reset, a way to move past everything without directly having to hash it out. I was relieved. But the moment we walked in, my stomach dropped. Sitting at a corner booth, waiting for us with a drink already in hand, was Emily. That hadn't been part of the plan. Daniel had made it seem like it was just going to be the two of us, a way to reconnect after the disaster at the expensive restaurant. If he had told me Emily was coming, I don't know if I would have agreed. Not because I had a problem with her, but because I was still uneasy about the way she had chimed in last time, acting like I owed them something. But I wasn't about to make a scene, so I pushed down the discomfort and sat across from her, forcing a polite smile as she greeted me like nothing had happened. Dinner started off normal enough. The conversation was light, mostly about Emily's classes and the holiday plans with their family. For a little while, I let myself believe this was just a coincidence, that Daniel had invited her without any ulterior motive, that this was just another casual dinner with his sister. But then the bill arrived. I glanced at the receipt, not because I was expecting anything, but just out of habit. The total was around $120, not absurd, but still more than I would usually spend for a casual dinner. Before I could even think about reaching for my wallet, Daniel did something that made my blood run cold. He pushed the bill toward me. I froze. At first, I thought it was a joke. Some awkward attempt to lighten the mood, maybe even a way to acknowledge what had happened last time in a playful way. But the look in his eyes told me otherwise. There was no humor there, no teasing grin. Just expectation. And then, to make matters worse, Emily leaned forward, stirring her drink lazily as she spoke, her tone casual but her words anything but. Come on, it's just dinner. It's the least you can do after last time. I felt my stomach twist. This wasn't just dinner. This wasn't about splitting a bill or covering a meal. This was a test, a trap, some kind of warped power play to make me prove something, to atone for standing up for myself the last time. They genuinely thought I had wronged them by refusing to pay for that $300 meal, and now they wanted to put me in my place. I looked at Daniel, searching his face for some sign that this wasn't what it seemed, that he wasn't actually expecting me to just take this. But all I saw was that same smug, infuriating patience, as if he was waiting for me to give in, to stop being so stubborn. I refused. I reached into my wallet, pulled out enough to cover my meal, and placed it on the table without another word. Then I stood up, grabbed my coat, and walked out. This time, I didn't storm off in a fit of frustration. I wasn't caught off guard like I had been at the other restaurant. This wasn't about anger, it was about setting a boundary. About refusing to let myself be manipulated. And I could feel the shift as I walked away. Last time, Daniel had chased after me. This time, he didn't. I drove home, my hands tight around the steering wheel, my mind racing through every single moment that had led to this. How had we even gotten here? How had the person I was supposed to marry turned into this, someone who would rather humiliate me than admit he was wrong? And Emily, who I had always liked, always trusted, was helping him do it. I had never felt more disrespected in my entire life. Daniel came home later that night. He didn't say anything at first. He just walked past me, dropped his keys on the counter, and went into the bedroom. The silence was suffocating, thick with the weight of everything that had just happened. And then, finally, he spoke. He told me I was being stubborn. That I was making things harder than they needed to be. That all I had to do was let it go, and things could be easy again. He made it sound so simple, as if the real problem wasn't what he had done, but that I had refused to accept it. I stared at him, trying to wrap my head around the sheer audacity of his words. I told him straight up, if you think I owe you or Emily anything, you're out of your mind. But instead of backing down, he just muttered something about how I was being selfish and went to bed without another word. Update 2. After that second dinner fiasco, I started feeling uneasy around Daniel. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was something deeper, something that made me feel like I wasn't on solid ground in my own relationship. There was this unspoken tension hanging over everything, like a crack running through the foundation of something I had thought was stable. Every interaction felt forced. The way he looked at me, the way he spoke, even the way he touched me, it was like I was suddenly an outsider, like he was waiting for me to give in, to smooth things over so he wouldn't have to. His patience wasn't the kind that came from understanding or kindness. It was the patience of someone who believed time alone would fix things, that if he just waited long enough, I would fold. I wasn't going to. A week passed. It was a slow, suffocating week where every day felt the same, tense, quiet, filled with the weight of something unresolved. We barely talked about what had happened at the Italian restaurant, and yet, it was always there, lingering between us. It was in the way he barely looked at me when we ate dinner, the way his responses to me became clipped and neutral, as if he was calculating exactly how much effort to put into acknowledging my presence. I could tell he was expecting me to get over it, to move on without him ever having to acknowledge that he had been wrong. It was like he had decided that my silence would mean agreement, that if he pretended long enough that everything was fine, I would eventually follow along. But everything wasn't fine. I could feel it in every moment of silence between us, in every sidelong glance that felt more like evaluation than affection. He was watching me, measuring me, waiting for me to give in and admit that I was the one being unreasonable. Then, he asked me to come with him to his parents' house for Sunday dinner. It was a tradition we had kept up for years, so at first, I didn't think much of it. It felt familiar, normal, something steady in the middle of all this uncertainty. Maybe he wanted to reset things, to make it feel like everything was back to normal again. A part of me was even relieved. Maybe this was his way of finally letting go of whatever weird expectations he and Emily had been pushing. If he was willing to just move forward without trying to press the issue, then I was willing to let it go too. Big mistake. The second I walked in, I knew something was off. The house looked the same, warm lighting, the smell of something roasting in the oven, the faint hum of a football game playing from the living room. But the atmosphere felt different. Too formal. Too rehearsed. The way Linda, Daniel's mother, greeted me, smiling just a little too much, the way Greg, his father, nodded at me with this unreadable expression, the way Emily was already sitting at the dining table, sipping her wine like she had been waiting for this moment. It was like I had just walked into a courtroom instead of a family dinner. I should have turned around and left right then. I sat down, trying to act like I didn't notice the tension creeping in from all sides. The conversation started off normal enough. Small talk. Updates about work. Something about the weather. But I could feel it coming. The weight of unspoken words pressing down on the table like an invisible force, thick and suffocating. There was an energy in the air, a shared understanding between everyone but me, like they were circling around something, waiting for the right moment to strike. And then, like clockwork, Linda made her move. She brought it up so casually, as if it was just another topic of conversation, but her eyes were locked onto mine the entire time. Emily had told them everything, she said, and she was really hurt by how I had treated her. I almost laughed. Hurt? By me? She was the one who had ordered half the menu without a second thought, the one who had tried to guilt-trip me into paying for something I had never agreed to. The one who had sat there, fully aware that she was putting me on the spot, and had the audacity to act like it was me who had done something wrong. The one who had been waiting for an opportunity to make me feel small, like my presence in their family was conditional, something I had to prove by opening my wallet. I barely had time to process that before Greg chimed in, his voice laced with that practiced, fatherly authority that made my stomach turn. "Relationships require sacrifices," he said. Maybe it would be good for me to show that I was serious about being part of their family. I sat there, gripping the edge of my chair, barely able to believe what I was hearing. They weren't just taking Emily's side. They weren't just dismissing my perspective. They were actively trying to turn this into a test. A test of my respect, of my commitment, of my willingness to play by their rules. And worst of all, they weren't even being subtle about it. They were laying it out for me, expecting me to accept it as if it was reasonable, as if this was how love and family were supposed to work. Linda leaned in slightly, her voice softer now, as if she was offering some sage wisdom rather than laying down an ultimatum. If I had just paid that night, none of this would have happened. That was when it all clicked into place. This wasn't just about Emily. This wasn't just about some expensive dinner. This was about control. About power. About putting me in my place before I even officially became part of their family. It was a test, and I had failed it by standing up for myself. I looked at Daniel. The one person who should have had my back. The one person who should have stepped in, should have defended me, should have said something. Anything. But he didn't. He just sat there, staring at his plate. Silent. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just Emily being entitled. This was a whole family thing. This was how they operated. How they expected things to be. And Daniel had no problem with it. He agreed with it. I felt something inside me snap, not in anger, not in frustration, but in absolute clarity. There was nothing left to say. Nothing left to argue about. Nothing left to salvage. I stood up, grabbed my coat, and left without another word. Update 3. After that disastrous dinner with his family, I stopped engaging. I didn't argue, didn't bring it up, didn't try to get Daniel to see my side anymore. I just stopped. I needed time to think, to untangle the mess of emotions that had taken root in my mind, to figure out what I was even doing in this relationship. The silence between us changed. It wasn't just tense anymore, it was loaded. Daniel noticed, of course. He wasn't oblivious. He could tell something had shifted, that I wasn't playing along with the usual script of getting over things, smoothing things over, pretending it never happened. But instead of addressing it, he did what he always did. He acted like nothing had happened. He moved through our days as if things were normal, as if I wasn't pulling away, as if the weight of his family's expectations wasn't still sitting between us. He asked how my day was, sent me little messages like he always had, made plans as if we hadn't just hit a wall that I wasn't sure we could come back from. It was almost impressive, his ability to rewrite reality in real time, to convince himself that if he just acted like things were fine, then they would be. I wasn't playing along anymore. Then came the last attempt. The final push. A few days later, Daniel told me he wanted to make it up to me. He suggested a weekend trip to a nearby city, just the two of us. A getaway, a reset, an effort to fix what was clearly unraveling. He booked a nice hotel, planned activities, really put effort into it. For the first time in weeks, it felt like a real gesture, like he wasn't just waiting for me to fall back in line but was actually trying to make things right. I went. Not because I had forgiven him, not because I was ready to pretend everything was fine, but because I needed to know. I needed to see if this was the moment where things turned, where we figured it out, where he showed me that he was the person I had thought he was. We got to the hotel, checked in, and had a decent first night. It was nice. A fragile kind of nice, the kind where things feel okay if you don't look too closely at the cracks underneath. We walked through the city, ate at a little cafe, watched people pass by while sipping overpriced coffee. For a moment, it felt normal. It felt like us. Then, at breakfast the next morning, it happened again. We sat down at a charming little restaurant, ordered food, ate. And when the check arrived, Daniel did the exact same thing. He slid it over to me without a second thought, like it was the most natural thing in the world, like we hadn't already been through this exact moment before. I didn't even argue. I just laughed. Not a normal laugh, not a surprised or amused laugh, a hollow, exhausted, I'm done with this kind of laugh. It bubbled out of me before I could stop it, the sheer absurdity of it all hitting me like a wave. He looked confused at first, genuinely confused, like he had expected me to cave this time, like the trip itself was some kind of down payment for my compliance. Back in the hotel room, I let it all out. Every ounce of frustration, of exhaustion, of sheer disbelief at what this had turned into. I told him how blindsided I had felt, how disrespected, how ridiculous it was that his family had turned something as mundane as a dinner bill into some twisted loyalty test. I laid it all out, piece by piece, every moment where I had felt like I was being backed into a corner, every instance where I had waited for him to defend me and had been met with silence instead. I asked him outright, why did this even matter so much to him? At first, he got defensive. He brushed it off, said it was just one dinner, that I was making it a bigger deal than it really was. But I didn't let it slide. I didn't let him minimize it. I pushed, and for the first time, he actually let the mask slip. He sighed, rubbing his face like he was already exhausted by the conversation, and admitted the truth. His parents had been pushing him about it. They had told him I had embarrassed Emily, that I had made a scene, that I needed to make it right. They had framed the entire situation as a failure on my part, a disruption of the family dynamic that needed to be corrected. Paying for dinner, according to them, was a way to restore balance. To prove that I understood how things worked. I stared at him, waiting for the part where he would say he disagreed with them. Waiting for the moment where he told me that he saw how absurd it all was, that he had been caught in the middle, that he had let them push him into something he didn't believe in. But he just sat there, looking frustrated. I asked him if he actually believed that. If he truly thought I had done something wrong, if he really thought that my refusal to pay that night was some unforgivable act that had put the entire family out of balance. He hesitated. He didn't say no. He didn't immediately shake his head and tell me that of course he didn't believe that nonsense. He sat there, turning it over in his mind, and that was when I knew. That was when I felt something in my chest go cold. Then, finally, he said it. He didn't know. He just thought it would have been easier if I had paid that night. That stung. I sat there, quiet for a long time, letting it sink in. Letting him sit in it. Because that was the difference between us. I had been waiting for him to see that what mattered wasn't whether or not it would have been easier, but whether or not it was right. Finally, I exhaled and asked him, easier for who? Because it definitely wouldn't have been easier for me. Something in his expression shifted then. I could see it happening in real time, the gears turning, the realization settling in. He was actually thinking about it, really processing what I was saying instead of just reacting, instead of just defaulting to what he had been told. After a long pause, he finally exhaled and rubbed his temples. He muttered that he got it. That he didn't like how this had played out either. That he shouldn't have put me in that position. It wasn't the perfect apology, but it was something. It was enough. For the rest of the trip, things were better. Tense, but better. It felt like the weight had shifted, like something had finally been acknowledged instead of ignored. When we got home, Daniel didn't bring up the bill again. Neither did Emily. Neither did his parents. Maybe, for the first time, they finally realized that respect isn't something you buy with a dinner tab.